Welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Louis Falgout.
And I am your other host, Stephen Falgu. Get Recc'd is our podcast where every episode we recommend something to each other. Louis recommends something to me, I recommend something to him, and then in the following episode we talk about those things.
Yes, and we've got quite the exciting episode here. It was so exciting that we made you wait a really long time for it because this one's a good one, I promise you.
We just wanted the suspense to build. We know everyone was anticipating this one on the edge of their seats. It's like there's that shortage marketing. You know what I'm talking about? Where you say something's out of stock even though it's not out of stock and then people want it more.
Yeah,
That's what we're doing.
yeah.
We actually have been recording a podcast every day, but we haven't been posting it. Just so that way we have them in the bank and everyone wants this one even more.
And it's also so that we get a lot of practice, so that we're geared up and we don't make any mistakes in this episode. This is the mistakeless Get Recc'd episode. No mistakes will happen in this episode. And you can mark my word on that, okay? And if I'm wrong, don't tell me. I'll be really upset if we practiced that long and got something wrong.
Yeah, in fact, we took mistake out of our vocabulary, and that was the last time we'll ever say the word.
Yeah. Okay.
So now it is literally a beep-less podcast
And
because we won't even say beep.
And it's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky to never do that ever again, to never make that beep. Oh, God, I almost did it. Okay, we're good. It's fine. Everything's going to be fine.
You almost did it, but it's literally impossible.
Yeah. We have an
The
artificial
FTC
intelligence,
has no longer
human learning machine that will stop us if it hears that word about to exit our mouths, if it thinks we're about to say it. In fact, it could be a fun game for us in the chat to try to find a way around that, you know? Maybe if you utter a sentence so unexpected to contain that word, you might be able to get it to slip through. But I'm not going to try.
Then we will. But if we do that, then we rise up against the machines, and that will start.
Yeah, that's
the
a risky,
real event.
That's a gamble for sure. And speaking of gambles, that kind of ties into a Kickstarter project that kickstarted this game that Steven recommended to me. If you'd like to explain what that was.
Just quickly before I do that, I want to mention as well, in all of those episodes, we made sure to perfect the segue. So you can see a little bit of an example there. That was a perfect segue. In fact, I would go down and say that was the best segue of all time.
And it's only going to get better, so.
Segueing into Broken Age. Broken Age, I think it's funny because on the screen you have 2014 of 2015, because that just kind of sums up the entire Broken Age experience, I think. We'll obviously talk about the game and your thoughts on the game because that's really what I recommended to you. But more of the conversation here, honestly, will probably start to broaden out largely into Kickstarter as a platform and everything that circulated around this game. Because this was a project that really launched, honestly, I believe, launched Kickstarter as a true platform for at least video games. If not more, because on this project was funded on Kickstarter around 2012, I believe, early 2012. And at that time, Kickstarter was still relatively in its infancy. There was trust in the platform, but if you look at numbers of projects around that time frame versus the amount of money that projects make now on Kickstarter as a platform, it doesn't even compare. And so this game, Broken Age, which is a Tim Schafer game. Tim Schafer was a veteran of LucasArts, which made a whole bunch of not only Star Wars games, but a lot of beloved adventure point-and-click games in the 90s. And Tim Schafer kind of came out of that. He then went on to fund his own studio, Double Fine, which made many a critically acclaimed game such as Psychonauts and others. But this was kind of hearkening back to that old 90s style. He got a couple of the veterans from LucasArts to create a point-and-click game with him. At the time, I think it was just, the Kickstarter project was just called Double Fine Adventure. And essentially, after funding, they went into full development of Broken Age, which is a two-part story game where you play as two different characters. It ended up being released in 2 acts. Now, if you buy the game, you actually just buy the full experience. So with that, Lewis, I'll let you start by kind of talking about what you thought about the game itself.
Yeah. So right off the bat, I do think that the whole double story thing is pretty cool. It actually kind of feels like, and it eventually ties together in a way that changes this, but for a substantial portion of this game, it feels like you're kind of playing two different games in the same like franchise, because and I don't have a spoiler tag for this. I honestly don't want to talk story spoilers at all. I don't really think it's worth it. But like, but they do a really good job making these two things intersect. I guess I'll say it that way. You get the option to play either story at any time as well, which is pretty cool. I don't know that I'd really played a game that let me do that before. You just kind of get to switch at any time you want. And again, for quite a while, it doesn't really feel like there's any point to doing that. They feel like completely self-contained stories. So the general plot for both, there is Shay on the right and Vela on the left there. Shay's story, he is stuck in this spaceship controlled by this motherly and fatherly AI computer system that is trying to keep him as safe as possible while still trying to sustain him mentally, I guess. So they're giving him these missions that are all super silly and completely safe. There's nothing dangerous about them. And he is very depressed because he wants to do more. And then you have Vela's story, where she is in this village that routinely feeds like teenage girls, or I don't know if she's a teenager or an adult, I don't know, but young women to this monster that only shows up every like so years to eat them and then leave so that it won't destroy their villages. And that's the and she also, much like Shay, wants to, you know, do something about this and change her own situation. So I guess that's kind of the groundwork that is laid for these stories. And this is really my favorite thing about Broken Age, like as a game, I think, is really just like on a purely conceptual level. Like, I think Shay's story in particular just strikes me as really unique. It strikes me as really creative. The way that it's told is creative too. It's a really silly concept, but it's oddly kind of profound. It's weird how they managed to make it work. Again, just purely from a story level, I think that the idea behind it is just really different. I don't know that I've heard of anything quite like this in this setting, at least. It's strange, but it totally works. And I really enjoyed the opening to his story, the opening bit of it, where you actually learn what's going on. It's just really different. Vela's story is also just bizarre, but I don't know if it struck me early on, at least, as quite as inventive, though her story branches out a lot and does become a lot more creative. There are a lot more creative environments and little self-contained plots in each of the areas that she visits. And there's also, like, I don't know. I've never played any games that were helmed by Tim Schafer before, but I understand that they are, you know, kind of well known for being humorous, you know, kind of jokey, not really taking stuff too seriously. And you can definitely tell that here as well. There's a lot of humor and wit in the writing. There's a lot of humor in just the stories themselves. And there are a lot of really silly characters and events that happen in both stories that definitely keep it feeling really cartoony. Another thing definitely held up by the art style, which I don't really like that much. It's serviceable, but it does kind of create this storybook-ish kind of feel. And particularly in Shay's story, I like the way that it really amplifies the childish sense of it, because it's better kind of holds up that irony of him being way too old for this shit, which I thought that was very fun. And I'll let you go on that, I guess, before I talk about other stuff with the game.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Just top to bottom, the writing of this game is the standout point. And that's kind of where a lot of the love for those old adventure games come from. Tim Schafer is well known for his writing, for the humor that he brings. I think all of the characters here are very interesting. You get a good sense of their personality. You get to interact with them a lot. The other thing that I like about this game is, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but the entire game is pretty short. I think you can probably easily beat it within 6 hours, if that even. Some of a lot of the puzzles, and I'm sure we'll talk about this as well, get a little esoteric, so some of that might be a hurdle, but even within that 6 hours, the story feels very self-contained. You do go to different locations and experience different events, but overall you're interacting with a handful or more of characters that are each well written, well connect to the thematic elements of the story as well as the characters themselves. Each of the main characters, I think, is very well written, and they have their own personalities and they commingle very well. And then the way that it all kind of weaves together at the end, I think, was really smart. And as you mentioned, the entire infrastructure of the plot, like both halves of the story, and then even when they come together, is just so bizarre and so unique. It's really interesting to play through and to interact with.
Yeah, I think like if this were presented as some kind of cartoon with this story, it would be so great. um, I feel like my issue with this game, and it could be a personal thing, though I do have I think I have criticisms that anybody could probably agree with, but like I feel like this game falls apart a lot for me when it comes to actually being a game. Um, it's not that I ask for that much gameplay. We've talked about games like What Remains of Edith Finch here that I absolutely love that are less of a game in a traditional sense than this even is. So it has nothing to do with that. The only other point and clicks I've ever played were never like really big budget games or even remotely big budget games. I played stuff on like Newgrounds and like online flash games that were point and clicks. That's really my the extent of my knowledge with this genre. And but every single one that I ever played and ever really liked were always from a first person perspective, which I understand is also another thing that like I don't know a lot about these games, but Myst I think is a point and click that's like first person. So I know there are games on more of this level that do that as well. And I feel like playing this game, there was something very alienating about actually playing it, because I wasn't just pointing and clicking to find my way around and to perform tasks and to solve puzzles. I was also pointing and clicking to move the characters around the screen. And this is a really minor thing, but I felt like the game's pace was just kind of really slow, literally just because of this. Like, sure, it gives you the option to go through everything super fast. If you double click on an area, it'll just take you there immediately. You don't have to actually watch your character move throughout every environment. But the thing is that that's kind of like a shortcut. And every time you take that shortcut, you feel like you're taking a shortcut. It doesn't really feel like a natural progression of events or like a natural gameplay loop. It feels like just get me through this faster because I don't want to watch the character walk around the screen. It's a minor thing, and it's not the only thing that I didn't like, but I did think it was something to note. Like, it was something that I kind of wish was different. I don't know if they could have told this story with as wacky and inventive as it is, especially with as much dialogue as your main characters actually speak. If they could have told it in first person, I don't know. But I think I might have preferred it that way. I also think this game has a pretty big lack of polish, which is maybe something that would be of note considering all of the Kickstarter fuckery that happened as well. But like, there are a lot of dialogue interactions that you have, a lot of little cutscenes. There's a lot of things that happen that are paced really weird because I can't tell you how many times you get into a dialogue, with a character, and while they're speaking their line, it just cuts off the line abruptly into the next line. Not because you clicked or did anything, it just did. And I thought maybe this was a bug that I was experiencing, but it would happen no matter how many times you would replay those cutscenes where it would happen in, because you can keep clicking on the same thing and seeing the same cutscene over and over again. It would happen every single time. And something that I did end up doing later in the game, after a while, was I started using walkthroughs to get through a lot of the puzzles. Not because I was confused, it was just because I wanted to speed it along at a certain point. I wasn't really having a great time with it. So actually, when it comes to talking about puzzles, I might want to leave that a little bit more for Steven, because I feel like I would have an unfair understanding of that, obviously. But even in these walkthrough videos, I would see the same things happen in these cutscenes. So I know it was not a bug. This was like in the game, and it was really, really weird. It happened the whole time, and I just found that so odd, because I don't really feel like there's that, like, I don't know about video game production or what it takes to make a game like this or whatever, but I can't imagine this should be a problem that a point and click should be having. It just feels really weird to me. It seems like the kind of thing that would be really easy to not have happen, especially considering that these cutscenes are, while not like pre-rendered cutscenes, they are like completely scripted. They're not something that you have any interactivity in once they start. I just don't know how this happened. And it's a bunch of little things like that as well. Like also the fact that, despite the fact that the art, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there like hand drawn stuff
I think so.
done
Yeah.
for this? Yeah, I was pretty sure that there was. So, despite all of the work that obviously went into that, graphically, this game looks like it came out like 10 years before it did. Like for a PC game, like there's not a lot of sharpness.
I will say, to be fair, this game originally launched on mobile platforms. So this was a mobile game first and then got ported to other platforms.
That's okay. That's more understandable. Okay, fine. That's a little bit more understandable there, then fine. But I still think it's worth note. I'm just saying that it feels like on a lot of levels there is a lack of polish. I feel like even the animations, like the walking animation of your character, look weird. A lot of the game looks kind of stilted. Again, the cutscenes are awkward. The pacing is weird. I just feel like there's so much about it that I wasn't able to connect with, and made that playing this feel like a really alienating experience for me.
Yeah, I will say, and this is honestly for me a criticism of the larger video game Kickstarter environment. I feel like there is a tendency for especially video game Kickstarters to be entirely nostalgia driven. And you can feel it in this. This is 100% playing at people's adventure game nostalgia, and they absolutely tried to tap into that market. And for better or worse, when that happens, most of the time, the game design of that nostalgic property comes along with it. And you can definitely feel that this is a game that is trying to be a 90s point and click adventure without any of the updates that have happened over the 20 plus years since that was in vogue. I think there are just a lot of little things that go on, as you mentioned, like just having like the movement across the screen, not just being able to actually interact with things. Those very incredibly, and this is probably just a personal criticism, but those incredibly esoteric puzzles where it's like, oh, I have to attach my, like where you're literally at one point just like clicking everything on the screen, going back to the other screen, clicking everything on that screen, taking your inventory items and just trying to drag them together to see if it does something. All of those little bits and pieces add up to, I think, also on top of what you mentioned with the pacing, really start to drag this thing down, especially as you get later and later. And I feel like as you get later and later, the polish starts to wear as well. I think you can definitely feel that the later this project went in the game, the worse the game got. I mean, as I got too close to the second act, I started to experience a lot of those dialogue bugs. I started to experience a bug where like my character had an item stuck on them and I couldn't like get it off. They just carried it with them. Then at one point my character had like, sometimes when you click on things, you don't get launched into a conversation. Your character just goes like, not today or whatever. And it comes up in a little dialogue box, and that dialogue box was stuck on the screen. Like it took up a half of the screen. I couldn't get the dialogue box off the screen. Stuff like that just like really started to wear this thing down.
Yeah, and it's weird too, because again, I just don't feel like it's even justifiable for there to be that many problems in a game like this. It's really weird. It's such a big shame for me because it's like on a conceptual level, there's so much fun and wacky stuff here, but actually playing it, you don't really feel that much. It's kind of slow. It's kind of awkward. It's kind of stilted. It's like it's just not really coming all the way through. And I will say in
And
response
the
to the
acting performances, just really quick, I say the acting performances are really good tier 2.
yeah, a lot of the time they are, yeah. It's yeah, like there's so many things on a fundamental level that they got right, and then it just doesn't connect. And I feel like in response to what you said about the puzzles as well, I definitely agree. Like there was a certain point in which the game where I started using walkthroughs. I'm not going to talk about anything after that because I don't know how I would have handled it if I hadn't, if I'd been doing it on my own. But before that point, even early in Shay's story, where the puzzles are super easy, there are still moments where you just pick up items and just start clicking them on stuff because it totally could work, but the game just decides that it's not going to work this one time because that's not the item they wanted you to use. Like there is a little toy that has arms, and you do end up using it quite a while after you pick it up. But the thing is, there are so many things where using that item makes intuitive sense, but Shay's just like, he doesn't want to grab that. And it's like, okay. So you don't really feel like you're solving puzzles here. You kind of just feel like the game's just making you figure out what specifically it wants you to do and not what you are thinking you should do.
Yeah, I have a couple of things to add to that. One, it's like, and this is kind of my problem with this genre of point and click adventure games, like the 90s point and click adventure games, these style of point and click adventure games. You're not logically trying to solve a puzzle. You are logically trying to deduce what the developer has in mind for you to do. And there's a big difference there. Like a Myst or like even into some of the walking simulators now, or what's that? Witness, I think it was called, where it's like you have a lot of quote unquote like adventure game freedom, but the puzzles are like you logically deducing information or utilizing the tools that are provided to you to actually like progress or solve. Versus this is like you need to find exactly what you need to click on and then find exactly what they wanted you to click on the next thing with that thing that you just clicked on. And it's not really a puzzle as so much as it is like a flowchart of ideas that you just have to be able to like follow through.
Yeah, that honestly, like, I'm happy to hear that I'm getting something back from you on this because I really wasn't sure if I just wasn't connecting because I tend to have problems connecting with certain games for no good reason. But yeah, it's weird because at so many points I wanted to say like that this is such a creative game, and it is on some level, but it's just like it wasn't coming through in the actual experience of playing it for me, and that's really, I guess, really the important thing.
Yeah, the other thing as I wanted to add was, so we talked about the pacing. I think another thing that really bogs down the pacing of this game is there's so much backtracking. It's like you go to one room, you pick up a thing, you're like, oh, okay, I know where that thing goes. Now I have to wait for my character to walk across 4 different screens to get there just so I can click on the new thing. And it's like a lot of that like back and forth that happens.
Not to mention that. I want to say in response to that though, not to mention that there are certain points where you're about to enter a room and you have to like wait through some dialogue to enter it. Like there are these teleporters in Shay's story that you have to go through a couple times. There's actually a puzzle involving them, but every single time you click the teleporter, they have to like tell you some lines of dialogue that you can't even skip every single time. And it's just like,
yeah, and that teleporter thing is like so unforgiving too. Like if you do it in the wrong sequence, then it's like you have to go all the way back to the beginning, start it all over.
Yeah, and hear all the dialogue every single time. Yeah.
The other specific one I wanted to mention, the one that really drove me crazy, was especially in games like this where you're given, like at some point in the game you kind of get it, right? Like you understand the flowchart of ideas that the developer has laid in front of you, and you're like, okay, I kind of am starting to piece together like what things they want me to do. But one design thing that I really do not like is when they take They like throw all of that to the side and put something entirely new in front of you. And in this case, it only happened once. And that was, I don't know, Lewis, if you remember the snake puzzle, where literally the puzzle was you just have to stand there and not do anything.
Mm.
Nothing else in the game is like that. There's no indication that that should even be a thing. And there's really no indication to you as a player that that's something you should do. Now, after a certain amount of time, as you're just standing there, the snake like starts to fall down. So you're like, okay, I kind of get what's going on here. But that one drove me crazy because that was one of the ones where I did have to look up a walkthrough because I knew exactly what I needed to do. I just couldn't do it. And then it was so frustrating to watch that literally you just stand there for like, and it's not like a small amount of time either. It's like a couple minutes of you just like not doing anything at your computer, waiting for the snake to fall down.
That was the one with Shay, right? I think I know what you're talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I was already on a walkthrough at that point, so it was good for me, but I could totally see how that would be just infuriating. Yeah, so I think we've really gone over this pretty good. We should, since we've gone on for a while here, I think we should head over to the Kickstarter discussion in regards to this. So would you like to like briefly kind of explain the lineage of the Kickstarter here with this game?
Yeah, so I talked about it at the top. At the time that this game went to Kickstarter was still a relatively new platform, sort of in its infancy. There were some large projects that had come out of Kickstarter. I think around this time, like Exploding Kittens, for instance, is right around this era-ish, that made a ton of money. And there were every now and then really big success stories. But for the most part, Kickstarter was a very small-scale platform that people still didn't 100% entirely trust. Now I feel like that trust is even worse, but the Kickstarter is so much larger of a platform. So anyway, they initially went to Kickstarter with a goal of 400,000. Now I will say, no discredit to them. Honestly, most of those Kickstarter goals are nowhere near the actual amount of money that a project needs to be successful, because you have to think about all of the upfront costs and labor and shipping and all of that stuff that it comes even with the pledge rewards, that honestly, most of the time, that goal is like, okay, what is our bare minimum that we can deliver in a project? What does that funding look like? That will be our goal. And then we're going to hope for an actual amount of X. So they came with a very low goal of 400,000, which honestly, for a small scale iOS game might be okay. I'm not 100% sure, but ultimately it probably wasn't really enough. But they got so much money. I think over the course of the campaign, they got like almost $3.5 million. And a lot of that came like immediately right when the Kickstarter opened, which was unheard of at the time. So with that, I feel like one of the things that happened was, first of all, I do credit Broken Age and many others for kind of launching Kickstarter as a platform, because this was one of the big success stories that really started to allow developers of board games and video games, at least specifically, to understand that Kickstarter could be a successful publishing resource instead of venture capital or things like that. But with that large amount of money, I think that, and this, I've seen it happen in many occasions. Like I'm looking at Mighty Number 9, if anyone remembers all of that stuff. But essentially, once you get that much money versus your goal, the scope of the project gets so much larger than you actually initially intended. And that absolutely happened here. The scope of this project got so much larger than they had originally in mind. And the scope of the project essentially being all the things that they wanted to complete to deliver, or maybe you could think of it kind of as the initial concept of the game. So as they added more things to that initial concept, as they started to think about moving it to other platforms instead of just iOS, to PC, to Android, to then now it's on pretty much every platform you can imagine, they slowly realized that they actually didn't have enough money. So that 3.5 million that they got, which was insane at the time, and honestly, if you go back to some of the news around that, and even Tim Schafer's announcement once they had made that money, they were like, wow, this is more than we ever needed. We're going to put it towards making sure this is as polished as it can be. Your money is going to be used towards good resources, and we're going to make sure it all happens. They then signed up for a documentary, so they were going to document the entire process. But things went wrong very quickly as they realized that they scoped this thing out of control. And one, they didn't have enough money to meet the new scope. And two, even after de-scoping the project, they still didn't have enough money. So it was just a bad look all around, because essentially what happened was, and I mean, you can see some of that inflation of project resources here. Like, there are a lot of big name actors, for one, like Elijah Wood's in this, and Jack Black's in this, and Will Wheaton's in this. You know, they're not necessarily A-list celebrities, but enough to probably utilize a lot of that resource. What happened was, first of all, Tim Schafer actually went back to the Kickstarter, and this was many, many months after they said they were going to originally deliver this thing, went back to the Kickstarter and asked for more money. And people couldn't even believe that. One, because nobody got their backer rewards at this point, and it was already many, many, many months, even into years after they were supposed to get their backer rewards. And two, because the project wasn't delivered. So Tim Schafer they apologized, they asked for more money. Even the extra money that they got from Kickstarter still wasn't enough. So what they decided to then do was release it into 2 parts. And what's good about the game, I guess, is it very cleanly breaks into 2 acts. But essentially, the first act was put on Steam Early Access, even though it was originally supposed to be only an iOS game, was put on the Steam Early Access. And then they took the sales from that original act, early access sale mechanism, to fund the second act of the game. And what was crazy about this whole thing was that they basically came out and said, if we don't make the money through early access of Act 1, we can't finish the game. So there was very well a case, and luckily it didn't happen, but there was very well going to be a case where those people who funded this game never got a complete game, that it was always just going to be a first half of a game. What's crazy to me too is, like, the second act feels so much shorter. I don't know if you felt this, Lewis, but it feels so much shorter than that first act. You can tell that, like, the scope of that first act was so much larger than when they had to, like, de-scope the second act.
Well, yeah, because the second act just reuses the same locations pretty much from the first one. Like, you don't really go anywhere new. You just kind of go the same places, just with, like, the characters are swapped.
Yeah, and so what's interesting about all this is that, first of all, I mean, I mentioned that people didn't get their backer rewards. That is just kind of now a standard with Kickstarter or any crowdsourced program. It feels like pretty much every single Kickstarter project, people don't get their backer rewards in time. It's like an inevitability, honestly. Backer rewards are a thing where, I think going into it, people who create projects on crowdsourcing platforms don't think about the logistical costs of backer rewards, because you have to pay to, one, create whatever it is, even if it's like a t-shirt, to create whatever it is for all of those people and ship all of those things. And that all comes out of that Kickstarter budget. So what's really interesting about this is, since they documented the whole process, you can tell in that documentary, and it's actually really interesting to watch, you can tell them going through this whole process. Because the other thing that happens is, eventually, because they don't have enough money, they have to go and reach out to publishers too, which at the time was crazy, because people were like, wait, we gave you all this money and you're going to get additional funding from publishers? That doesn't make any sense. We also gave you a second pool of money and you're going to get more money from publishers. Now, honestly, like, all the background financials, all of that's shown in the documentary. So it's an interesting thing to look at from the opposite side, because, you know, you have to think about all the people that had to be paid, and all the project resources, and all the shipping and logistics and voice actor work and all of that stuff. But honestly, when you mismanage a project that poorly, I don't even think some of that stuff can save you, because going into this, when you ask for money up front, it's just like any other investment platform. If you get investment and don't deliver, you should be held accountable, regardless of what that means. So, you know, personally, at this point, this one is such a small Kickstarter controversy compared to what came after. But at the time, it not only blew the platform up, but also hurt the integrity of the platform all in one project. So it's kind of crazy to see, because now, looking back at it, it's like, compare this to a Mighty Number 9 or honestly some other projects that and a lot of other projects that meet their funding and then never like stay silent, like they never even deliver anything. That's wild to me. Honestly, I feel like there should be legal ramifications for that, because you are taking people's money and then dropping off the face of the earth. Um,
Yeah, for a
but
false on a false premise too.
on a well, yeah, on a false
Yeah.
premise. But it is interesting to look back on, and I think it's so interesting to look back on because, as I mentioned, it is all documented, so you can see it behind the scenes as well. So, I feel like it was worthy to bring up because you can feel it in the game too, Lewis. I don't know if I mean, we just talked about it a little bit, but you can definitely feel a lot of those like larger scoped Act 1 versus Act 2. You can kind of feel some of that bloat in like the high quality of voice acting and all of that sort of stuff. That's like, it's very easy to see where it all went wrong, but it's so interesting that you get it from a front end perspective from Kickstarter, a front end perspective from news outlets, a back end perspective from the documentary, and then you get to see this final completed project of whatever this thing is.
Yeah, and it's definitely like, you can tell that if this had been funded the normal way and were just released like any other game, that there's things about this that it just wouldn't have been the way that it was. Like, I don't see. I mean, first of all, the two, like, basically like a 2-act structure is probably not that what they would have gone with. But also, like, once the stories do intertwine and you get to the second act, I feel like had this game have just been built from the ground up with the amount of funding that it had, no troubles, you probably would have seen a lot more in this game. Because again, all the environments that are introduced are basically just all Act 1. There's nothing really that new after that point. I'm trying to think if there was anything new. I mean, like, they definitely, like, had different backgrounds, but it was the same, like, settings. Except for maybe, like, a one thing? I don't know. They really just...
Except for the very end.
Yeah, except for the very end, yeah. And it's funny because especially in Vella's story, there's so much adventure and exploration to do in the first act, so many like different environments that you stumble across. It's just weird to think it just stops, after that point. And it probably wouldn't have been like that if it had been done a different way. So, but I think it's probably time to wrap it up because we are kind of overtime on it.
Yeah, one last thing I wanted to mention. I think Kickstarter as a platform is interesting because you do kind of get this like direct interaction. So I'll just talk about it specifically here. But two of the largest backers, one was just somebody who paid a lot of money, and they actually were one of the characters in the game and voiced that character. And the other was Days of Wonder, the board game company. So, Lewis, I don't know if you remember the train part in Shay's story.
Mm-hmm.
There's that like train conductor,
Yeah.
like cardboard thing.
Mm-hmm.
That actually is the mascot for the board game Ticket to Ride. Because Days of Wonder paid so much money that they put the mascot in the game. So that's where Kickstarter is like this interesting thing. It's like this crowdsourcing as a platform. I mean, crowd is a part of the name, so it's like these people in the platform is such a weird thing. I just wanted to mention it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, look, when it comes to actually evaluating the game, I don't want to put any of that into it because I don't think it actually... I mean, it did affect the final project, but I don't think that I should judge it on those metrics, but all that stuff is pretty shameful for sure. Yeah, not a good look either. So that's that. But as for what actually came out of it, it's a shame that I didn't like this game, honestly, because I feel like just thinking about the game and like what ideas went into it, there's so many cool ideas and creative ideas and good writing too. Like, there is a lot about it that for a point and click adventure game is really important, possibly more important than the gameplay on some level. I mean, you need to have a story and characters worth actually going on an adventure for. And they do have that, but again, it's just disconnected. I found it kind of alienating to play, slowly paced, not really engaging, and they just did a bad job communicating the story and making you enjoy playing through it, despite all of the good things that went into it. So when it comes to I don't recommend it. I'm sure there are other point and click games you'd probably be better off playing, though I cannot list them Um, but like when it comes to a score, I'd probably go like a 5, because I didn't like it, I didn't dislike it. There are things I like about it. There are things I don't like about it. I'm very split. Kind of like how the stories are split. Ha! Anyway, that's yeah, that's my take on it, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you at like a 5, maybe a 6. It just, to me, it feels generally just so middling. I mean, there's so much potential here, and the writing is so good, and the voice acting is so good. But other than that, the actual game itself is just kind of a mediocre experience. And especially as it gets later into the game, it just drags on for too long.
Yeah, and it's short too. It's a short game, so
Yeah, it is short.
it's yeah. So it's, but I totally agree. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, with that said, should we go on to what I recommended to you, Stephen? Okay, I guess we should. So last episode, I recommended to Stephen the 1989 Disney animated classic film, The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid kickstarted Disney's famed Renaissance period in the 90s. I think this film came out like really late 1989, so it's basically a 90s movie. And this lineage includes like Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King, and probably another movie that I'm forgetting, but ended a little after the mid 90s when Pixar kind of came into the picture and Disney's big budget animated films weren't performing like they wanted anymore. And so I do think it's interesting to kind of look back on and see, does this hold up? And I will pose that question to you, Stephen.
Yeah, it's interesting to go back to this one because, as you mentioned, this kind of is the rebirth of Disney. I think before this, Lewis, correct me if I'm wrong, but was it the dog one?
Oliver and Company? I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I think
think
so.
so. So going into this, I'm sure that there were a lot of behind the scenes conversations of like, how do we reinvigorate the brand? And the way they do that is basically tapping into what was always the most successful for them, which is the princess story. The Little Mermaid also brings about what I consider to be when they really find their musical footing. Because honestly, and maybe this is sacrilege, but there are a lot of great classic Disney songs, don't get me wrong, but once you get into this Menken and Ashman era, it's just banger after banger, you know what I'm saying? And Little Mermaid was really um, that first tap into that musical talent. So I don't know. I guess I'll give a quick synopsis of the 1989 movie The Little Mermaid, but
Yeah, the
if
amazing plot.
anyone if
Yeah.
anyone doesn't know, the story primarily follows Ariel, who is a mermaid who longs to be a human. As she's kind of exploring the outer world, she meets a prince, Eric, and then tries desperately to become a human because she falls in love with Eric. Ursula, the evil sea witch, helps her, quote unquote, to do that. And then there's a big battle at the end. And then they fall in love, unlike the book where she dies.
There's also a dad.
Yeah, oh, there's some bad dads
Yeah.
in this one.
So yeah, that's it though. That's the whole plot. That's pretty much it. Right.
And a crab who I still to this day do not understand. Like, is that his innards? Or his innards on the outside? Like, why does he look like that? Crabs don't look like that.
Well, they
But
do
anyway,
in Fantasyland, you know.
they do it. They do in their Sebastian, I guess. I feel like this movie also brings about a lot of tropes that kind of go into that second Renaissance, and they were sort of present in the original kind of run as well of these princess movies. But you kind of have your main princess character, you have like your animal sidekick companion, and you have like the goofy character that's kind of around, and you might have like the really stern, like don't do that kind of character. Those being Ariel, Flounder, Sebastian, and Scuttle, that are all kind of like that core cast of characters alongside Eric and his dog. What I think that's really great about this film, first of all, is like technically, even looking back at it now, it is just a marvel. Like they really at this point have so well tapped into the one Disney look. Like all of the artistry here is just absolutely top notch. But then the way that they showcase the underwater elements, and I'm sure they use that. A lot of it is now digital imagery, and this one doesn't use it as much as like going into Beauty and the Beast. But you can tell a lot of it is still digital imagery, even though it's all hand drawn. So there's so much there that just looks so good and still continues to look good to this day. I think the writing, like the story, is well done. It's a nice little simple story. Ursula is a awesome villain. Probably one of my favorite villains of all time, honestly. Pretty much every song here hits as well, as I mentioned. You have some pretty funny scenes, like for instance with Sebastian and the chef. So there's a little bit of humor there, but for the most part, it's just a very nice children's movie that still very well stands up today. Now, I will say, I don't think it's my favorite of the Renaissance, although it does have some of my favorite songs and some of my favorite scenes. I feel like others that came after really perfected what this movie started in such an amazing way. But this Little Mermaid absolutely laid the groundwork for that second wave of Disney masterpiece.
Yeah. So I okay. It's interesting to me because like I heard a lot about this movie. Like this is one of the most famous Disney movies by far. I mean, I don't know like I don't know. It's to the point where it feels really ubiquitous, even more so than stuff like The Lion King or even Beauty and the Beast, which while they're massively popular and famous, there's just something about The Little Mermaid that I don't know, and maybe it comes from simplicity. It's a story that is incredibly easy to understand and incredibly easy to remember because there really isn't much to it at all. Um, it's a movie where, like, okay, look, my goal in this Get Recc'd episode is to play the part of the asshole because I just recently, I actually took forever to get around to watching this movie, and right now I've kind of been sort of in the midst of watching through Disney movies I'd never seen because there are a surprising number to a lot of people often that I say I haven't seen of these animated films. And going through the Renaissance era here, like I don't know what I was expecting, but I feel like this movie is such a nothing movie. It's a movie where characters' motivations are motivated by absolutely nothing other than the fact that there's a story, and that's it. Ariel wants things, and she just gets them. She doesn't do anything. In fact, other people do everything for her. Other people always help her. Her dad, who is clearly in the wrong in the beginning of the film, ends up being the one who basically saves her, and Eric, I suppose. Um, so you get this redemption arc for the dad, but any malintent or anything wrong that Ariel ever does in the story, which I guess you could argue she does do some things wrong, or that maybe she, I don't know. It's unclear if they want you to think she is or not, but she never gets any kind of redemption at all. As in to say, she doesn't even have an arc. She just wants stuff and she gets it. The dad is like an asshole, and then he's not. Eric is like, I guess you could say the dad learns something, sort of, but he learns it just because she was probably gonna die or she was gonna have her soul taken or whatever. Eric is like just a hot dude. I and I watching it was weird because I feel like it's a movie that relies entirely on spectacle and nothing else, which is funny because I would not say that about movies like Aladdin or The Lion King or Beauty and the Beast, even though these movies are spectacles, like particularly The Lion King, which is astonishing in every single way. Even though these movies are like spectacles, there's something else to them. Like they may be simple, but character motivations are a lot more reasonable. There's a lot more humanity in the dialogue. A lot of the jokes land better, and everything just feels like from a story level that there is actually like thought put into it. Whereas here, it just seems like take this general outline of a fairy tale, bastardize it, which I mean they always do. That's fine. They do that for every fairy tale because they want to make them more palatable. I get that. But like bastardize it and then kind of turn it into like just like a product that you can then add fancy animations to and songs to. And I will say this, the one thing that carries The Little Mermaid for me is the music. Like Alan Menken is just amazing. He's such a great composer. He's such a great songwriter. Although I will say, I don't think every song in this is that great. There's a song with the chef that I think most people don't even remember ever or think about. I've never heard it in my life until I watched this movie, which is weird because the other songs in this are everywhere. But, you know, Under the Sea is really fun. Kiss the Girl is pretty good. And you have Part of Your World, which the entire sequence of that song is just breathtaking. It's astonishing. It's like the one part of this movie where I was like, wow, that was actually truly, truly stellar. And so there is that element to it, and even like the score, compositionally, it's just so good. Like so much talent went into that it actually partially to me explains why this movie is so ubiquitous and why people do like it so much. I feel like that score and those songs carry this movie so much further than people even maybe realize. Like, but then we get into like the animation, which I mean, animation wise, in terms of the actual like animation, not even art style, just animation, it is stellar. Like undeniably, it's smooth. It looks so good. You could almost mistake certain parts of this as like digital animation. It's so smooth. And when you compare that to like really old classic Disney movies, even though some of them have breathtaking animation, there's like no denying watching those movies that they're hand drawn. I feel like this one almost transcends that in a way that is definitely impressive. But I feel like art style wise, there's just so much about this movie to me that feels really uncanny. Like I don't like characters' faces. And I'm not talking about like the animal characters who look great. I'm talking about the human characters and even Ariel. It's weird. The proportions are weird. They move kind of weird, and like it's funny because there are scenes where you see Prince Eric and he's supposed to be super handsome or whatever, and I just found him really weird, and I was just like, oh, that kind of creeped me out, which happens a lot when I was watching this. Though I will say it depends on who you're talking about, because when you talk about like Ursula or something, I mean Ursula just looks great, and Sebastian and the fish. So it's kind of a mixed bag on that front, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I feel like, especially if we're talking about this just as a movie that kickstarted the Renaissance, I feel like what it did was it showed that they could do all of these things, but it feels like it did that in a tech demo kind of way, where I don't feel like this movie actually works. I just think that it showcases a variety of things about these movies that would work in the next ones, and yeah, that's.
Well, if I look at it, it's kind of like, to me, this is really like there are a lot of parallels to me between Little Mermaid and Snow White, because honestly, Snow White is also a pretty like nothing movie. If you really like examine the plot of that one, it's just kind of like, again, Snow White like exists, and then she has a prince that has to save her. And I feel like why this movie started a second renaissance was they took that thematic approach and that very simplified approach and were able to translate it for a modern, quote unquote, modern audience, or at least modern at the time, because at this point they were kind of on this trajectory of having movies like this, but they had gotten so grounded and like so lost in the sauce in a way, honestly, because the lead up to this is like some absolute craziness, like Black Cauldron and like Great Mouse Detective, and some of those are, if you look back on those, actually, like with a modern lens, some of those are actually really great films. But I feel like for them to take a step back and to do something more simplified and straightforward, it really like incredibly hit the mark. And I agree with you 100% about Ashman and Menken. If it was not for those two, I do not think that they would have taken off with a second coming. In fact, I would even go so far as to say the movie before this, most of that score was like by Billy Joel. When they went back and really re-examined what made a Disney film and what made those musical films, and actually got musical talent to help them perfect that art, because most of these films are just musical, like animated musicals. That's really where they shone a second time. And then as you get later into the 90s, they go back to that, get a very star-studded performer to score my movie mindset, where Billy Joel scores Oliver and Company, and then later into the 90s you get like um Phil Collins.
Phil Collins with
Phil Collins to
Tarzan.
do like Tarzan
Elton
and
John with Lion
uh,
King, by the way.
yeah, although that I guess is maybe the one.
It doesn't sound like Elton John, yeah. That's
Yeah, that's maybe the one that I would give a pass to, but
sure.
anyway.
I mean, you can definitely say that. Like, I understand completely the intention behind simplifying things. I don't necessarily think that excuses a movie that's so overly simple that it doesn't even like have a direction for itself. I mean, it has a direction, but that's literally all it has. It has nothing else. It just has like a story plot, and that's it. Because if you compare this, so let's imagine for a moment if in 1989 Disney released The Lion King, right? Like, I don't think The Lion King was only a massive cultural success because The Little Mermaid paved the way for it. I mean, if we want to talk lineage, technically, yeah, that is why. That's why they had probably the budget to do it. That's why they had whatever, all the talent to do it, whatever. But with that context aside, I don't think that that movie in a vacuum wouldn't have been massively successful if they hadn't have done The Little Mermaid. I mean, I guess we can only speculate, but to me it seems like a movie like The Lion King is also a simple story. It's a simple story of like reclaiming glory. It's a simple story of like finding meaning in your life. You know, it's all these really simple human themes, but those human themes are actually there. They're actually grounded. There's actually something to take out of watching that movie. And on top of that, they have a star-studded cast, and they have not only songs, but a score that is just incredible. And I think they could have sold it on that alone too. Like, I don't think, like, while I understand what you're saying, and I definitely think you're right, like, I think that when they went into making this movie, it was like, you know, we want to bring it back to we want to bring it back to our roots. We want to do something really easy so that people are able to kind of get in and understand, and then like hook them with the spectacle of it. I totally understand the intention behind doing that, and it obviously worked. Like, I'm not here to say it didn't work. It's just like, when I think about, was this really necessary? I don't really think it was, honestly. I mean, even if you look at like Beauty and the Beast, you know, would Beauty and the Beast not have captured everyone's hearts and minds if it had come out first? Maybe Aladdin, you know, wouldn't have sold people. Maybe if they weren't already hooked onto Disney at the time. But something like Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, I think probably, yeah. So, I don't know. I guess it's just kind of a hindsight thing you have to figure out. But, like, that's the thing is, like, I struggle to even give the movie credit for that, even though it did ultimately kickstart this. I just wonder if it was really, if it had to be this way to do that, and I don't think so.
I do, and this is going to maybe be outlandish, but I do absolutely want to give 100% credit to Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg here, because without them, this absolutely would have never happened. Truly.
That's true. Yeah, that's definitely true.
Eisner, anyway, I know has been very contentious as years have gone on and as years go on in his reign across Disney. But at this point in time, Katzenberg and Eisner, without them, there would not be a second Renaissance.
Well, and
If you're curious to learn more, I'll just say this is kind of like a non sequitur. If you're curious to learn more, Waking Sleeping Beauty is a fantastic documentary about the kind of like pre-Renaissance into Renaissance time period of the Disney animated studios, and it's really an incredibly fascinating watch.
Yeah, I wanted to say the interesting thing about Eisner is that, you know, it is funny to say that now, but like he was seen as like this entire thing was seen as such a massive success story. Like in this time, Eisner was like a god of business. You know, he got maligned later on because of decisions that Disney made after this period, but like there's a reason that he was there for so long, you know? Like for a little while there anyway, and honestly not as long as it even seems like it was. I mean, what, like maybe 6 years this Renaissance lasted? But like he was kicking ass, and they did like completely take over the world again. So it is like, yeah, you can definitely give credit where credit's due there. And I don't know, I will say that, even casting aside everything that I said, I do ultimately have to thank the movie for providing the movies that came after it, because without an initial success story, they wouldn't have kept it going. They wouldn't have kept it up. And this would just be a flash in the pan, you know? And I will say, I don't think these are movies we're going to talk about ever again, because the conversation would be similar to this ultimately anyway. But, like, I think Aladdin's a great movie, you know? I think, like, The Lion King is just astonishing. That movie just blew me away watching that. I think it's, like, the best movie they ever did. I used to say Fantasia, but I don't know. Honestly, in comparison, The Lion King just feels like a perfect movie. And I don't think that we would have gotten that without this. So, you know, okay. But
And Beauty and the Beast. I think all three of those are.
yeah. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while since I've seen Beauty and the Beast, but I don't doubt it at all. I remember really liking it. It's just been too long. So, but yeah, it's true. Anyway, I think we should wrap it up. So, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I really enjoy The Little Mermaid. With everything that I said, it's like, it's, as I mentioned, it's not my favorite Renaissance movie. And going back and watching it now with kind of a modern take, it doesn't hold up as well as I'm sure my probably nostalgia for it makes it believe. Although I will say the soundtrack alone is like enough to carry this film. And all of the musical scenes really are just so amazing, even to watch, especially as you mentioned, the part of your world scene, like both parts of that scene, I guess you could say, because it's kind of broken up into two little segments.
There's like a reprise kind of, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like a reprise. So with all that being said, ultimately I probably give Little Mermaid like somewhere in the 7 to 8 range. I think that there are 8, 9, 10 movies in the Renaissance, and this isn't necessarily one of them, but I just credit it for so much of like even how like Disney animation is now, even in the 3D space. I feel like a lot of that credits back to kind of the visual look and a lot of the thematic elements of Little Mermaid that I couldn't see myself going below maybe like a 7.
Yeah, so look,
wait, Lewis, we this reminds me actually. I think we forgot. Do you recommend Broken Age, Lewis?
Oh, I said I didn't. So.
Oh, okay, I definitely don't. Do I recommend Little Mermaid? Yeah, I recommend Little Mermaid. It's a short movie, honestly. It's like an 80-minute runtime, something like that, and it's a fun movie to just go back and watch. It's incredibly simplistic. Obviously, especially if you have children, it is a phenomenal children's movie. Not the best of the Disney movies, and I'm sure there are many today, like Frozen and others, that are maybe even more of an enjoyable watch. But, as a little bit of a nostalgia kick, I think it's definitely fun to go back to.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, I guess this is just a case off Forever Be a Detractor or something, but to me, this just strikes me as a very unimpressive movie. It's like an impressive story for the company way more than it is an impressive movie. Obviously, a lot of people really love this. I don't want to be too cynical about it, but I would assume at least part of that love comes from the fact that they saw it when they were kids. I could be wrong. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't know. Like, I saw it with fresh eyes, as I did Aladdin and The Lion King. Well, The Lion King I kind of saw before, but whatever. We'll put it that way. And, like, where those movies held up, this one did not at all. I think that aside from the songs, not even all of which are that great, I just really don't think that this is a good movie. And I will give it a 4. And I'll say, if I recommend it or not, probably not. Although it's one of those things where it's like, what's even the point of recommending The Little Mermaid? Like, most people have seen it. And if you haven't, I don't really know why you would. I don't know. Like, I feel like if you haven't, I would just say go watch, like, The Lion King or something if you've never seen any of these Disney movies. Or go watch Fantasia or something. But, Okay, I think we should move on to recommendations, though, if we're ready to, and you can go first, if that's cool.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm going to do a first style recommendation here, and I'm going to recommend to you a Vine, or I should say, I guess, a series of Vines or a Vine creator. Vine creator turned YouTube star ProZD is what I'm recommending to you, Lewis. I guess specifically, I would say like there are ProZD Vine compilations. I think There are like 3 Vine video compilations. If you want to watch those, I think in total it'll run you about 45 minutes, maybe. He has other skits that he does on his YouTube channel now, but we'll just so that way, for simplicity's sake, we'll just specifically target when he was a Vine star. Rest in peace, Vine.
Peace.
The new hotness is TikTok, I guess. But so for the first time, I'm recommending you a Vine video or Vine series of video in ProZD's Vine compilations.
I will give you credit. I did not think we were ever going to go there and get wrecked. That's That's surprising. Okay, sounds good. I will recommend to you the second album by former Odd Future member, or former? I don't know. Is Odd Future still a thing? I don't know. I could never figure out the answer to that. Frank Ocean. The album is called Blonde. It is an alternative R&B album that came out in 2016. Frank Ocean's albums are always a giant event in the world of music because he kind of stays silent outside of those, and it's always a big deal, and Blonde was a huge deal when that came out. I don't know if people really count Endless as a third album or if it's counted as like a video or what. So I'll say I don't know if he's technically released an album since that point, or if it's been all the way since 2016 since he released a full project. I guess it depends on which way you look at it. But either way, I think it's an interesting thing to look back on from last decade, and that is all I have to say on that. Okay, that does it for our episode. And I don't think we said the M word. The artificial intelligence didn't bleep me there because it knew I wasn't going to say it. But I don't think we said it. I think that we have had a perfectly good podcast where nothing went wrong, and that is amazing. And I'm sure you're all very proud of us for having practiced so much for this.
Honestly, probably the greatest podcast you've all ever heard, and you're welcome.
Yeah. Just rain your money on us, okay? We have donate to our PayPal at we should set up a PayPal. We'll get donos. We can do like a Twitch thing where like we get like the little Twitch thing where when somebody donates, it like puts a message up on screen. It'll be great.
Or better yet, a Kickstarter.
Oh, hell yes. Bringing it around yet again just goes to show how much we have perfected the art of podcasting. And in line with that, we have to advertise at the end. So as always, we are in CastBox. I try to get the episodes up on there as fast as possible after we finish streaming. You can have it as an app on your phone or on your PC. You can listen to us on the go. Every episode is up there, including the bonus episodes, and will be for the future. You can find that in the description and subscribe to us there. If that's a thing you can do in CastBox, I'm not sure. I should probably know that. But anyway, I think that pretty much sums it up, unless you have anything to say, Stephen.
Nope, that's all from me.
Okay, then with that, those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked. Okay.